Chapter 7. It was a quiet community joke when in 1926 Rome enforced Canon 505, which said that all local superiors would have to be changed every 6 years to another mission or released from her office administration for at least 1 year. This meant for our community quite an upheaval, since every sister servant would be uprooted from where she had been, and it touched every private sister because there would be the ordeal of having a new sister servant. So each one took a second look at the bird in the hand and wondered what the bush would yield. But the quiet joke recalled even today in the community was the coincidence that the first sister servant missioned under the new decree from Rome was a very tiny, quite capable person whose full name was Sister Regina Gunn. Canon 505, and off goes the littlest gun, became a household word for a long time. The constant missioning that went on for the whole year of 1926 was a nervous but humorous time, as is the case with the Daughters of Charity everywhere, who seem to have a special gift for injecting laughter when tears threaten. Sister Catherine stood ready like a soldier for any summons that, however painful, would call her to another duty. The days became edgier and nerves were taut, but the knowledge that one is doing or assenting to God's will makes intelligent obedience synonymous with a deep-seated peace of soul. Sister Martha especially had need of summoning all of her soldierly strength to meet this trial. But strangely enough, there was no trial, no sorrow of separation. The sisters had simply forgotten that God's eye is always on the sparrow, and he, quite visibly, was their real and only commanding officer. Sister Eugenia wrote that the work of Carville came under the category of special cases, which meant special treatment, and that Rome had approved a double new term for Sister Catherine as superior. She had been sister servant for 13 years out of the 21 years she had spent in Carville. On an afternoon in 1936, she was seated in her office when she saw Sister Martha walking as if in pain down that part of the mile that leads to the sisters' quarters. Thinking to meet Sister halfway, Sister Catherine started out, but noticed that Sister Martha had turned into the Sacred Heart Chapel, where she stayed a full hour. Not wishing to intrude on a conversation with God, Sister Catherine went back to the office and waited. Finally, Sister Martha came to Sister Catherine and said, "Sister, I am having serious abdominal pain." She looked earnestly at Sister Catherine and said in a tired voice, "I am dying, Sister." Sister Catherine hurriedly called an ambulance and rode with Sister Martha to New Orleans Hotel Dieu, where our sisters awaited her arrival. The next morning, Sister Martha Lawler died. We pass over the morning at Carville, where Sister Martha was so much loved by staff and patients alike. Sister Catherine accepted this as God's will, but could not understand that he had given her no premonition that this was to happen, as he so often did. But of one thing she was absolutely certain. With Sister Martha safely in heaven, with a God who understands us all, because he made us, she herself was now on his agenda for change. In 1930, Sister Carolyn Collins, one of the most beloved sister servants in the province, was named Assistant Visitatrix. Now at that time, the position of the Assistant Visitatrix was pretty much like that of the Vice President of the United States, a sort of standby job that occasionally merited half a column on the 4th page of the newspapers. She missed acutely her work as principal of St. Patrick Grade and High School in Chicago. Her sisters felt as though the world had stopped when she bade them goodbye, Of course, they would meet her frequently at retreats in St. Louis, but that was not like having her for their very own sister servant. How this happens to be recorded in Sister Catherine's biography is that the custom of the community is to have newly made provincial superiors make an 8-day retreat at the Mother House in Paris, then a 2 or 3 month period of travel, always beginning with Rome. Very shortly after Sister Carolyn's arrival in St. Louis, she was notified of her European tour and was told that Sister Catherine Sullivan would be her companion. The two of them had a wonderful time, free as birds, with the chief attraction for a Collins and a Sullivan, the Green Hills of Ireland. If space permitted, their letters home would make a rich contribution to this biography, but it would also take space that cannot be afforded when one is trying to compress a very active life of 82 years into a possible 200 pages. Sister Carolyn was a faithful and loving support to Sister Eugenia, who was herself almost too old now for active duty. She had sent in her resignation 2 or 3 times, but superiors at Paris told her she must carry the cross to the end. Sister Eugenia died July 11th, 1936, and Sister Carolyn was named her successor, and unknown to happen before, the new assistant visitatrix was named in the same letter, none other than Sister Catherine Sullivan. Writing to a very dear friend in England, Sister Mary Meehan, with whom she regularly corresponded, Sister Catherine describes her always unusual reactions to great events. Here are a few excerpts from her letters written while Sister was still in shock over the news from St. Louis. Isn't it incredible? Or rather, are not both things incredible? First, that I should be preparing to leave Carville, and secondly, that I should be preparing to leave it for the duty of assistant. I know that you have heard of the change because I received a letter from Sister Catherine Krauscher some days ago. Everything came to an end just as quickly and decisively and as unexpectedly as death. On September 28th, Sister Zoe and I returned from Baton Rouge at 4 p.m. after a pleasant afternoon's shopping. As soon as we reached home, I sat down in the office to answer a delightful letter received that morning from Archbishop Rummel. At 4:15, a telegram arrived. Important message awaits you at Marillac Seminary. Please come to St. Louis without delay. You will return to Carville after the conference. My dear, I know how exactly the calmness which supervenes when a sacrifice is inevitable. I glanced at the clock. If I could leave in an hour, I could drive down to New Orleans and get an evening train. I showed the telegram to Sister Zoe, asked her if she could get me packed up, knelt in the chapel, and told our Lord that 20 years of perfect happiness was more than anyone was entitled to, and was on my way before I could get word to half of the sisters, since most of them do not come up from the colony until 5:30. Of course, I hoped against hope, and at night, finding sleep rather out of the question, even on the most comfortable of Pullmans, do you know what I did? Said our chaplet? Guess again. Prayed to our holy founders? No. I just kept my mind fixed on what I would order for breakfast. Yes, it seemed to me that in a world that had suddenly gone chaotic, I could bring order back and restore normalcy by planning a meal and stopping life just at the point where an obsequious waiter says, "More cream in your coffee, ma'am?" Well, when I got into Union Station at 4 p.m. the next day and saw Sister Carolyn, assistant, and Sister Isabella, treasurer, at the station, my heart sank. I knew very well they had not come down to check a trunk. And oh, how merrily we chatted on the way to Marillac, all about the war in Spain and the condition of the crops and the coming presidential election, but not a word as to why I was there. The Habit sisters and seminary sisters were lined up at the front door, but I was too dazed to take in what it meant. But the Reverend Director was also waiting in due state in his office, and it was he who handed me the patent, letters, etc. I learned later that the circular of the Superior General, Father Souvet, announcing Sister Carolyn's appointment as visitatrix and mine as assistant had been read at 2 p.m. the day before. All I could think was that our dear Lord had liberally sugar-coated the pill because we were all so happy to have Sister Catherine for visitatrix that it did not matter at all who the assistant would be. Promptly the next day, like something that has been sent for an approval and did not suit, I was sent back to Carville to make the community's peace with the government officials, the patients, and the sisters. Dr. Hazeltine, the commanding officer, Dr. Denny had retired a few years ago, took the change like a soldier and a gentleman, stipulating only that I was to remain long enough to initiate my successor. So that accounts for my being still at Carville. So far, my successor has not been named. The sister servant's position here is a very delicate one. De jure, she does not exist, but de facto, she figures rather largely in the picture. Officially, all of the nursing affairs are referred to the chief nurse. As long as the chief nurse and the sister servant are one, and a fine rapport exists with the commanding officer, all goes well. I hasten to say that I know that all will continue to go well, but I feel I'm much like a woman selecting a daughter-in-law when it comes to picking out someone for Carville. All of those comely and capable, efficient and virtuous sister servants whom I have admired so much suddenly develop flaws never seen before. I think you will sense, dear Sister Mary, that if I speak lightly of leaving a labor loved for so long, it is simply because I dare not do otherwise until I have closed the books and written finis to a chapter which I had hoped to end with my life. If the community had decided that someone else would do better here, oh, how readily would I have agreed. If the government had found fault with my services, I would have been comforted by the thought of one who came unto his own, and his own received him not. In my heart of hearts, I have always dreamed of something of the sort, years from now, and I would have looked upon that as the seal of the Master's approval of my work. But to have the burden of that the community and the government look upon as an honor, thrust upon me at the same time that I must face the pain of separation from Carville, dear Sister Mary, I fear I must have great spiritual pride, for it all seems to me to be so commonplace. In humble imitation of Paul, who knew nothing but Jesus Christ and him crucified, for this long, while I have known nothing but the Master, suffering, despised, rejected, and misunderstood in the person of our patients, known him and loved him with a joy that made each day a marvel of new joy. Is that an adequate preparation for the new duty? Even as I say that, some lines and sentences from that inspired work, The Anchor Hold, recur to me. She standeth so very near to the cross, and she standeth so very still, that she sees things from God's point of view. Truly, I have been privileged to stand very near indeed to the cross of the suffering poor. And again, as I look out at the high levees which have formed the limits of my duty and my desires, I recall, and between encompassing walls she hath found the infinite, infinite pity, infinite understanding, infinite love. After a few weeks in St. Louis, she writes again to Sister Mary Meehan. While we are speaking of geographical limits, do not forget that Perryville, Missouri, where Sister Bertrande is just 80 miles from here. Sister has found it convenient to spend 2 weekends here since my arrival, which rather bears out what my little stenographer in Carville said when I was missioned. Well, I know one person who will be glad, Sister Bertrande. In regard to leaving Carville, dear Sister Mary, God treated me as he has always done, indulgently. Happy as I was there, dearly as I loved the sisters, eager as I was to spend the rest of my life in the service of the patients, when all that no longer spelled the will of God for me, I closed it as easily as I would a book that I had finished. And now I wait, with the contentment of a child, to see what God wants me to do. At present I am not very much occupied, and certainly I keenly miss slipping into a white hospital gown at 7 a.m., realizing that I was putting on an armor and would go forth to battle not only with disease, but with the more insidious and deadly foes of rebellion, cynicism, bitterness, and despair. I never realized how intense the life was until I viewed it in perspective. I realized, though, that most of my work was made work, things entirely outside the regular line of duty, and I rather think it will not be long before I shall be making some work for myself here. During the month in which I have occupied the assistant's office, I have managed to give to it a general air of untidiness and disorder hitherto foreign to the Marillac, but which is very familiar to me. I have for my secretary a charming little sister named Sister Emily. She made her appearance in the office a few days after my arrival and asked in a perfectly correct tone to go with the perfectly correct office if there was anything I would like her to do. I sensed there was a crisis, for at that moment my soul was longing for the glad disarray, not to say actual chaos, of Carville ways and days. I sat a bit straighter in the chair. With a meditative finger, I moved a paperweight back to the exact spot where it has rested for 20 years, and then replied, "Yes, sister, if you please. I would like to dictate a few letters." Now, while the letters were semi-official, they were to sisters whom I had known, lo, these many years. So right in the middle of a perfectly conservative sentence, I went radical. Sister Emily paused, looked up rather panic-stricken, caught my eye, and, well, her name is not O'Flaherty for nothing. Since then she appears hopefully twice a day, gaily asking, "Any letters, sister?" The sisters are very good to me, Sister Mary, and I cannot begin to tell you how grateful I am. As to Sister Catherine's seemingly unconquerable fault of untidiness, a little anecdote which points up a singular, almost miraculous growth in willpower should be told here. Shortly after Sister Catherine became assistant visitatrix, she remarked quite happily to a sister friend, a very close friend, that she was just about the untidiest woman in the world, and maybe should be given an award. The sister replied that she would like to give the award if Sister would accept it as an act of love. Sister Catherine sobered. "Something's coming up. Yes, I shall accept it as another of your countless proofs of love." Thus assured, the friend said gently, "Sister, once, say at Carville, you represented yourself, just you. And we all loved you, just because you are you. But now you represent the whole province. Think of that in relation to untidiness, will you, sister? The one exception is your desk, because anyone can see that within that disorder is a certain order all your own, and it works out just fine." Sister Catherine impulsively kissed the sister and said, "Thank you, angel. I never doubted your love, and now I never shall." The point of this anecdote is that the subject never came up again. Never could anyone impute untidiness to Sister Catherine again, and they never did. She was without any affectation, always well-groomed, and her room was as austerely neat as if it were kept as a guest room. She accepted the reprieve about her desk, but it was only the desk. The rest of her office was never in the smallest disarray. Never once could anyone call her untidy again, and the friend lived under the same roof with her for more than 30 years. Under date of September 25th, Sister Catherine again writes to Sister Mary Meehan in England. "I am aghast. I have read the first paragraph of your letter, which ends with the sentence, 'You have not written this year.' That hardly seems possible. I am very sure I wrote sometime around the Easter season. But in any case, I'll take my clue from that and run over some of my activities for this year. Sister Carolyn is very generously determined that I shall get well acquainted with the province. So the Marillac sisters have taken to saying pleasantly that I come home only to have my washing done. Early in the year, I made a trip to the houses in my native state of Texas, timing my arrival at Sherman to coincide with the golden jubilee of a dear ancient sister there. You may recall that Sister Teresa Kelly, who spent 10 years with us at Carville, is sister servant there. She very naively remarked that for once she was glad to be a sister servant because that gave her a greater claim to the assistant's time. I had been home just a few days when the serious illness of 2 sister servants in Chicago, Illinois, left the infant home and the hospital with no one to direct them. They are both very important establishments with a large corps of sisters. I spent 2 months there dividing my time between the 2 houses. Now, if you get a map and look up Missouri, you will also find Kansas City and St. Joseph. In Kansas City, I, for the first time, found out how a boys' home is conducted and dived into the history of our Kansas City boys' home. A visitation at Keokuk, Iowa, was sandwiched somewhere in those months. And now I have just come back from a flying trip to Louisiana and Texas, during which I had the joy of spending a day and a half at Carville. Joy? No, not that entirely. As a matter of fact, I experienced even more pain at parting this time. But I hasten to say that's perfectly all right. And if our dear Lord allowed the flames which I thought just flickering out to brighten up again, He will know how to smother them in time. Since most of Sister Catherine's work as assistant visitatrix was strictly community, and in those days strictly community was hush-hush, now it is, happily, everybody's business, and newsletters from the visitatrix come out weekly for all to read and to speculate upon. We are grateful for Sister Catherine's letters in which she can speak for herself. We quote from Sister Mary Meehan's letters because they extend over a period of 39 years. The following tells of our taking over a second charity hospital in Louisiana. I know I have not written you this year, so I shall just take a glance over the calendar and pick up the highlights. Perhaps dearest to our Lord was our acceptance of a new hospital in Lafayette, Louisiana, a state institution of 250 beds, exclusively for the poor. Bishop John Mart of that diocese is a personal friend of our good Father Suve, who has relatives in Lafayette. Consequently, despite the fewness of our vocations, we could not refuse this institution when the Superior General signified his desire of our acceptance. Of course, we ourselves were only too eager to take up a work so decidedly ours. I made several trips south in the interest of this project, but was not present for the opening. I do wish I had a copy of the circular letter which Bishop John Mard sent to the priests of his diocese, asking them to be present for the opening of the hospital and to thank God for the blessings that would come with the sisters' presence. Truly, our holy founder, St. Vincent, must have smiled most heartily at what was an echo of his own day. One notices here, if one is perceptive, how Sister Catherine's work with the state and federal government in Carville had given her a wide range of experience that was tremendously useful to the community. In 1947, Sister Catherine writes, "Who would have thought when I sent you the card from Emmitsburg with the notation that you would hear from me soon, that the soon would prolong itself to more than a month? Well, dear Sister Mary, letters or no letters, you know that you are always in my heart. Let's see, I did tell you on that card that I had been traveling for 2 months. Traveling that took me to Chicago and Milwaukee, to Carville and New Orleans, and then on to the Eastern Province, where I spent some time in Washington, D.C., Emmitsburg, and Baltimore. The business that detained me for quite some time in Chicago was installing Sister Bertrande Meyers as sister servant at Catholic Social Center, which will in a few months be replaced by Marillac House in another part of the city. Of course, you remember my speaking frequently of Sister Bertrande. Since earning her doctorate, she has been superintendent of schools and educational directress. You may well believe that we have made some sacrifice in now turning her abilities and talents into the channel of social works, but those works are, above all others, for the poor, so why should anything be preferred to them? Anyway, Sister Bertrande, with her unlimited energy and her genius for organization, will keep her fingers on the pulse of the schools and continue to direct the sisters' studies at the various universities. I shall enclose some clippings about Marillac House, and you will hear much more of it from time to time. Now for the business that took me first to Carville and then to Washington. I was invited by the Surgeon General of the United States Public Health Service to be a member of the National Advisory Board on Leprosy. The Surgeon General has only 3 national advisory boards, one on cancer, one on mental health, and now this latest on leprosy. It shows how much attention they are paying to the disease that has been for too many centuries ignored. May I say modestly that the advisory boards are made up of experts in their particular fields, and that of the 16 members on the Leprosy Advisory Board, I am the lone, lorn woman. We met in Washington at the Public Health Service headquarters, and I think we really made history. Practically, we wrote an Emancipation Proclamation for patients with leprosy. It was decided to establish clinics in all the large cities in connection with the marine hospitals, which are dotted all over the United States. As each case of leprosy is diagnosed, it will be considered individually, and no longer will blanket segregation apply. Many of the patients need not be removed from their homes, nor even from their business or employment. They can continue to lead normal lives and get the treatment they need at special clinics. Of course, side by side with this new approach to the disease must go a campaign of education for the public, beginning with doctors and nurses, who as a rule know as little about leprosy as does the ordinary layman. That too was all mapped out. If I can find them, I'll also include some clippings on that subject. Sunshine and shadows mingle in life. While we were yet in the glow of satisfaction caused by the accomplishments of the advisory committee, we were shocked by news from Carville that one of the patients went berserk and made a murderous attack on Sister Mary Mead, attempting to cut her throat. The man, who has been there some 6 or 7 years, was always rated as strange, but no one dreamed that he had homicidal tendencies. One Sunday morning, Sister Mary Mead was in the diet kitchen, getting things ready for the patient's dinner, when this man came in and made some very unreasonable demand. Without even turning from what she was doing, Sister said, "Now, Mac, you see that I am busy. Go back to your room and I'll talk to you later." The man immediately advanced on her with his pocket knife, slashing her throat before the screams of a girl nearby caused Sister Georgiana to run into the room. Though Sister Georgiana is just a mite of a thing, she grabbed the man's arm and prevented further harm, and the patient was finally subdued. Sister Mary Mead walked down a short flight of stairs, and with blood pouring from the gaping wound, collapsed at the sister servant's feet. You can imagine the shock. However, Providence permitted that a number of the sisters and also a doctor were there to give first aid, and after that, Sister was taken in an ambulance to Hotel Dieu in New Orleans, where she is recovering nicely. Her collar, which was cut through, deflected the knife somewhat, so that most of the wound was lateral rather than transverse. The patients feel as shocked as the sisters, for during her 26 years at Carville, Sister Mary Mead has been the personification of devotedness. Even though the man was adjudged violently insane, they feel terrible that a thing like that should have been done by one of the patients. However, you and I know, Sister Mary, that daughters of charity can take these things in stride. And in fact, Sister Mary Mead is only waiting with not great of patience until she can be discharged from Hotel Dieu to go back to Carville and take up her work again. Once when Sister Catherine was asked if there was much violence at the leprosarium, she said, "Not really often, Sister, just occasional excitement. For example, I remember one day at my morning meditation hearing the unmistakable sound of a revolver shot. I tore out of the chapel and found that 100 yards from me a man lay on the ground, gasping his last breath. A man was standing over him with a smoking gun. Chester, the man with the revolver, scratched his head, looked at me in a sort of bewildered manner, and said, 'Sister, don't things happen funny? I was standing here talking to Leo, and suddenly he became shot.' Just as we have our own post office, we have our own jail." On trains and planes, and on her brief intervals at Marillac during these busy times, Sister Catherine read avidly in all the fields covered by our varied apostolate here in the United States. She became an expert on children's institutions, not an armchair expert, but just for one example, she spent weeks at the homes we have dotted across the country, thus getting first-hand experience working with the group leaders and other members of the staff. Most eagerly of all, she was interested in how philosophies of administration worked in various states and regions. They had changed much since her days at St. Rose's. She likewise attended conventions, where she was so vocal from the floor that everybody got to know Sister Catherine and her advanced views in childcare. They clamored to have her on committees, commissions, podiums, and finally on the governing boards. She was invited to speak at all important conventions and came to exert great influence on the National Conference of Catholic Charities, writing for them various handbooks that she knew would be helpful to the sisters engaged in apostolic work in the field of social welfare. She was responsible, under the leadership of Father Slattery of the St. Louis Archdiocesan Catholic Charities, for the amazingly successful Child Guidance Clinic, a service to bright but emotionally disturbed children of all races, color, and creed, but under Catholic auspices, of course. In a letter to Sister Mary Meehan, she tells of its beginning. "On Sunday last, we had our first meeting of the Board of Directors of the Child Center of Our Lady of Grace. That is the title we have given to our Child Guidance Clinic. Isn't it beautifully suggestive of what we will need to make our dealings with the little ones successful? We invited 38 prominent men and women of St. Louis to act on the Board of Directors, and wonder of wonders, received not one refusal. We had intended limiting the board to 25, but when all accepted, what could we do but expand the number? This is the third child guidance clinic to be started in St. Louis. The other two, one a municipal clinic and one attached to a secular university, were each discontinued after some years. Frankly, they were failures. We will not fail, please God, because we have what the others did not and could not have, a Catholic philosophy. This child center will figure largely in my letters from now on, I am sure." Sister Catherine had a wonderful way of listening to the various private sisters tell of their spurts of inspiration. She looked upon every sister as an idea woman, and in that way she acted as a talent scout for our different works. One sister, Dolores Garreau, who was Mexican by birth and entered with an extra fine family background and experience in Mexican culture, had always an almost obsessive occupation for bettering the living standards of the lower class Mexicans in the United States. Sister Catherine was most interested in her ideas for a maternity unit separate from the General Hospital, Hotel Dieu, excuse me, that we operate in El Paso, Texas. Again, we can hear it like it was from Sister Catherine's unfailing pen to Sister Mary. As you can see, I am once more in my beloved El Paso. You will recall that I spent some weeks out here last June consulting with the Catholic Welfare Association in regard to maternity care for the poor mothers of El Paso, of whom there are thousands among the Mexican population who have had to resort to non-Catholic agencies for help. We planned a pre- and postnatal clinic and a maternity unit, the latter to be on the hospital grounds, the former 6 blocks away. They set to work with a will, and at their invitation I returned to El Paso on the Feast of St. Patrick to accept in the name of the community the maternity building, which would be opened on the Feast of St. Joseph's. And oh, Sister Mary, it is a perfect little jewel of a building. For once the poor have the very best of everything, in planning, in building, and in equipping it. It is, as I told the gentleman, an act of Catholic faith as well as of Catholic charity. For Catholic faith, taking literally the words of our Lord, "Whatsoever you do unto the least of mine, you do unto me," would offer to Christ in the poor only the best that it has. The clinic is also complete in every detail. Now my plan was to remain here 2 or 3 days, then go to Carville by way of New Orleans. A 36-hour straight trip, by the way. But these excellent Catholic people, having tasted success in one project, are eager to go on to more. So what we have planned, and actually started in less than a week, reads like a fairy tale. However, let me give you the setting first. Mr. Joseph Morgan, a large general contractor, the wealthiest citizen and most influential Catholic in El Paso, has been for months a patient in the hospital with inoperable cancer. However, his mind is keen, and he is able to be up in his room, and even down to his office almost every day. Also, his 4 fine sons, whom he has trained in his views and ways, are all in his business and ready to carry out every suggestion of his. Then mark the uniquely providential situation. The recently appointed auxiliary bishop, the active head of the diocese, has his living quarters at our hospital. So one has but to plan in the morning, secure financial backing at noon, ecclesiastical approval in the evening, and the thing is done. On the 20th, Mr. Morgan began to talk to me about a community center for the underprivileged in connection with the San Jose Maternity Clinic. In this center would be washing machines, where the poor mothers could bring the family washing to do, sewing machines that they could use, and in another section a stove, refrigerators, etc., where they would be taught cooking, with emphasis on children's foods and infant formula. And not the least important, there would also be rows of community showers. There the clients could enjoy the luxury of a bath. After a lengthy discussion, Mr. Morgan said suddenly, "Well, draw your plans, sister, and we'll start the building Monday." And this was Thursday. You may be sure Sister Dolores and I lost no time in doing so, and when we took him the sketch, he immediately sent it down to his office to have a blueprint made. Then I began to think that the mothers must of necessity bring a number of little ones with them, which would necessitate a playground. So on Sunday, Mr. Morgan, Bishop Metzger, Sister Dolores, and I went down to look at a lot next to the yesterday planned building. The outcome was that we decided not to buy not only that lot for a playground, but 2 more as well. There is a house on each of the last 2 lots on which our covetous glance rested. One can be used for a boys' club, for the roughs and toughs, and who are excluded by reason of moral or mental defects from the Boy Scouts and kindred organizations here, and the other as a demonstration home for the School of Maids, which came mentally into existence as we looked at the house. These poor Mexican girls must, for the most part, go into domestic service, but coming from such hovels as they do, they are the despair of the women who hire them. We plan to give them a several months course in those tasks which the ordinary home requires, including the use of electrical appliances. When we have them trained, we will conduct an employment agency and can ask for the girls a better salary than they would dare ask for themselves. If I do not dwell on how all this material assistance will be the means of aiding them spiritually, it is because you will obviously grasp that. The ladies of charity will help in the supervision of all this work, and I think that some of the Mexican nuns, exiled from their native country some years ago, can be worked into the picture. Naturally, I would like to see all this well on its way before I take my departure. So I have written Sister Carolyn, asking if she wishes me to stay. Perhaps one of Sister Catherine's greatest achievements in the apostolate of children's institutions was the erection of a new one on the cottage plan as a substitute for our old red brick Boyle Heights orphanage in Los Angeles. It had been falling apart for years. With no money in her pocket, Sister Catherine was sent to Los Angeles to see what she could do. She writes of this assignment to her faithful friend, Sister Mary. When I left Marillac very early in June, no one dreamed that my stay out here would be such a prolonged one. Archbishop McIntyre demanded that someone come out to see what could be done about rebuilding the orphanage, and I happened to be the someone who could best be spared at that moment. The project developed into 3 stages with many subdivisions. Number 1, raise $750,000. 2, find a new site. 3, draw plans and get them approved by the various state and social agencies. The second of these had us stopped so far as progress was concerned for 4 months. To find a site with sufficient acreage close to the city, with accessibility to schools, and one where the zoning laws would permit the erection of a children's institution, presented undreamed of problems. Only last week did we come across one wholly desirable, and now we have started the legal machinery that will give us possession. Would you believe, dear Sister Mary, that though we have the money in hand to pay for the place, and the owner is anxious to sell, it will take 6 weeks before the sale can be made? I wrote to Sister Carolyn and suggested that she have a little shack put up on Marillac grounds where I could start a real estate business. There is not a thing I do not know now, not only as to the suitability of sites for different purposes, but I can also warn my clients against all legal pitfalls such as restricted residence clause, zoning variances, oil and mineral rights retention, etc., etc. I hope to start back to Normandy about the middle of December, but I am not at all sure I can do so. Sister Catherine did not succeed in getting away in December. It was June before she could leave. Writing to her brother-in-law some 10 years later, she spoke man to man on the things Mr. Newton Stower loved to discuss. It is one of the crosses that so often Sister had to carry, with never a word about them, and always a cheerful, blessed be God's holy will, in answer to those who would express their sympathy, that brought Sister Catherine close to this favorite brother-in-law. He was the husband of Sister Catherine's sister, Constance, her only living sister. One evening, Constance had awakened with a dreadful headache, which she mentioned to her husband. He was frightened at the slurred way she spoke, and he suspected, what became tragically evident, that Constance had experienced a cerebral accident. He summoned an ambulance and took Constance to a Catholic hospital in Shreveport, where she remained in a coma for 8 years. Newton Storr was heartbroken and visited the hospital twice a day and kept 3 nurses round the clock to care for his wife. He bought for her the most fabulous negligees with slippers to match, not realizing that Constance, who had loved pretty and expensive clothes, would never have need for them again. His loving attention to Constance endured the entire 8 years until her death. Naturally, Sister Catherine appreciated this evidence of love, and the longer Constance lived, the greater devotion she felt for this brother-in-law. We quote in full a letter that Sister Catherine wrote after Constance died, and Mr. Newton Storr was planning a trip to Los Angeles. Dear Newt, I must hasten to get my Christmas greetings to you, since your letter of December 10 tells me that you will spend the Christmas holidays in Los Angeles with your sister, Mrs. J.G. Hester, and her family. I cannot tell you, Newt, how pleased I am that you have decided to do that. It will really make my Christmas happier, knowing that you are with your sister. I had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Hester when I was in Los Angeles, some 10 years or so ago. She came to see me at the old Los Angeles orphanage. I was very pleased to meet a member of your family, and if I recall correctly, her own family is quite an interesting one. So, Newt, dear, give your sister my love and my fond remembrance. I spent a year in Los Angeles in the interest of raising funds for a new orphanage, there being an absolute necessity for replacing the old building on Boyle Heights, which had long stood as a landmark in Los Angeles. I discovered that I really had a talent as a fundraiser. Our initial estimate of the expense of a new orphanage was $750,000, and that seemed quite a large sum at that time. But as we progressed, our own ideas as to what a modern children's home should be altered greatly, and when the institution now known as Maryvale was finally completed, it was at a cost of $2,250,000. I smiled when I found out that all we owed on it was $750,000, or exactly what we first estimated the buildings would cost. That meant that we raised $1.5 million. In addition, we had made so many friends that we didn't feel at all anxious about the debt on the institution, and as a matter of fact, it has long since been paid off. Really, Newt, I wish you would just drive by Maryvale in South San Gabriel. As Mrs. Hester will tell you, San Gabriel is a suburb of Los Angeles, just about a 30-minute drive from the heart of the city. You will find it a modern, really beautiful house of the Lord built for his least little ones. And please thank God for letting me be his real estate manager and planner. Let me give you another tip, Newt, that may be handy, though I hope you won't need it during your stay in Los Angeles. We have St. Vincent's Hospital there, and if you should need medical care, just mention my name, and no matter how crowded they may be, they will find room for you and give you super attention. But as I say, I hope you won't need it, and that your visit with your sister will be wholly unclouded. I presume you will take the trip by air, which means if you go jet flight, it will take just about 3¼ hours. That is how long it took Sister Bertrande and me to come from San Francisco to St. Louis. All goes well with Sister Bertrande and me, and she frequently mentions you with great appreciation. Devotedly yours, Sister Catherine. Although Sister Catherine always insisted that she had never had any real life-sized crosses to bear, it would seem that it depends on how one defines crosses and how one's viewpoint shapes one's attitudes. It is true that Sister Catherine had a wonderfully happy religious life, and she loved and treasured her vocation as a daughter of charity beyond all human blessings. She loved life almost voraciously and lived it to the full. I think the secret of her most unusual life was her steady growth into an almost superhuman conformity to the will of God. It was by no easy process that she developed this actual, palpable love of God's will and recognized it in even the smallest vicissitudes, and even more especially in joyful events. She was a humble person in her reactions to success, to high praise, to public acclaim. It never went to her head. It just seemed that to her every moment was a special grace. If anyone said to her, and they often did, "Oh, sister, God has greatly gifted you," she would answer, "Yes, sister, I believe he has, so I must get back to work now, for that is what he gave me those gifts for, to work, not to stand and admire them." Her secret for making life wonderful was that she accepted life on God's terms. What his terms were and how she accepted them on a certain Sunday afternoon in November may be seen in this letter she wrote to Sister Mary Meehan, late in November of 1951. It will be no surprise to you when I say that thanks to God's preventing grace, Sue's death occasioned me neither shock nor grief. Death is so much God's business that one simply bows unquestionably to the time, the manner, and the place. I had talked to Sue over the phone just the previous evening. She lives in a little town just 100 miles from Dallas. She was delighted to hear that I was so close and said that she and her husband would drive up either the next day or the day following. I was expecting any minute that she would be announced that afternoon, when Sister Alberta Savage, the very devoted sister servant of St. Paul's, came into our room a little after 3 o'clock saying, "I have terrible news." Thinking she had just discovered that the fire damage was greater than at first estimated, I smilingly said, "What terrible news now, sister?" There was no time for sister to phrase her message in a preparatory way, so she replied at once, "Your dear sister Sue was killed, and her husband critically injured in an auto accident on the way here. She has been taken to a funeral parlor, and he is dying at Parkland Hospital." I cannot express, dear Sister Mary, the peace, almost the exultation that filled my heart. Sue dead, another loved one safe for all eternity. I think my calmness puzzled and perhaps almost embarrassed Sister Alberta. I said aloud, "So Sue is dead. God rest her soul. Let us go first to the funeral parlor and then to Parkland Hospital." A priest had been sent for, and he arrived at the funeral parlor just as we did. Although there were no signs of life, and she had been pronounced dead, as it was less than an hour since the accident, Father anointed her. For one fleeting moment I realized what I would have been without God's grace. From the merciful sheet that had been shown over her body, wisps of blood-stained hair protruded, bits of shredded clothing hung down. The floor on which we knelt was wet from a hasty mopping. Why that was necessary I knew all too well. Just for a second I felt exactly as one would who, standing at a great height, suddenly felt all support withdrawn. But the emotion passed almost before it registered, and my silent ejaculations of "My Jesus, mercy, Lord have mercy on her soul," were infinitely peaceful. I kept whispering to my too rapid heart, "Be still, my heart, and listen to thy God." From there we went to Parkland Hospital, where her husband was being treated in the emergency room. We called a priest, a Vincentian, because the hospital is in their parish, to anoint Walter while the surgeons worked over him. He could not be moved from the table for 5 hours, so there was no question of transferring him to St. Paul's at that time. I notified his children, 2 daughters and 2 sons, all of whom live within 150 miles of Dallas. They drove over with their wives and husbands, and also my sister Constance. Sunday morning. The accident was Saturday afternoon. A family conference was held at St. Paul's to decide on the details of Sue's funeral. All were unanimous in deciding that she would wish to be buried by our parents in the family plot in Shreveport, Louisiana. Her husband could not be consulted, as at that time we did not think that he knew Sue was dead, though we found out later that he did. He remained fully conscious despite his injuries, giving my name and address to the ambulance driver who first reached the scene of the accident. The only reason he refrained from inquiring for several days about the accident was that he feared it might have been his fault. When he found out that it was caused by a drunken driver who turned his car into the wrong lane, dashing head-on into the marshal's car, and that no amount of skill on his part could have saved Sue, an unbearable weight was lifted from his heart, and he again found the will to try to live. I am happy to say that after hovering between life and death for several weeks, he is now on the road to recovery, though he will be in the hospital for another month or two. But he has been moved to St. Paul's, and that means so much to all of us. What Sister Catherine was never to know, though perhaps she does now, is the result of her soldierly self-discipline. It would be only natural to most of us to lift the sheet for one brief look at Sue's beloved face. She of all the sisters resembled Sister Catherine the most, but she did not touch the sheet. She knelt with tear-filled eyes upright and in perfect control. Had she raised just a corner of the sheet, she would have found no face at all. Alert, intelligent Sister Alberta told the mortician that Sister Catherine and Sue were perfect lookalikes. So quietly and unobtrusively, the mortician's artist sketched Sister Catherine as she knelt as still as stone. Later, Sister Catherine and all the relatives said as they gazed at Sue in her coffin, "Oh, isn't she natural?" And they murmured their gratitude that her face had been unhurt. But one of the family said, "Sister Catherine, I told Sue just last week that every day she resembled you more and more." It pleased her very much. Months later, in speaking of Sue, Sister Catherine said, "It was a perfect miracle that Sue could look so peaceful. And do you know, she was the image of me." Chapter 8. On January 26, 1952, Sister Carolyn Collins, so beloved by the entire province, died of an infirmity that she had borne with unbelievable stamina for more than half of her community life. Her biography has been written and shows once again the tremendous soldiers formed to the religious life by Sister Augustine Parks and her predecessors. On March 15, 1952, anniversary of her first vows, Sister Catherine Sullivan was installed as the third visitatrix of the St. Louis province. Her varied and prolonged experience in each of our different works made her an honest-to-goodness Wonder Woman. For no sister in any of our far-flung works ever found Sister Catherine stumped. Whether it was a problem in public or private school relations, whether it was hospitals becoming entangled with Medicare, Medicaid, data processing, child care, or geriatrics, she knew them all, for she had been there. It is, I think, safe to say that no one had ever come to the duty of visitatrix better prepared and with better credentials. She was acknowledged over the province as the most spiritual sister in it. Her experience at Carville in dealing with the government at Washington, called to join in many conferences with the Surgeon General, asking advice of prominent leaders, making lasting friends of almost every professional contact, provided not only invaluable to all communities, as well as our own, but is a tribute to her boundless zeal in promoting the work of the Church in every way that came to hand. Moreover, Sister Catherine had an accomplished secretary, Sister Margaret Mary O'Connor, whom she trained to be much more than secretary, for something new was to be learned every day. And Sister Margaret Mary learned to anticipate Sister Catherine's wishes, and carried them out with the same competent zeal that prompted each action of Sister Catherine's. There was a perfect and loving rapport between them, so that it can honestly be said that Sister Catherine could not have accomplished all she did were it not for Sister Margaret Mary's loyal and effective support. This preface is to turn over to the reader the task of answering the question, what do you think is the greatest contribution Sister Catherine made during her long years of service? 58 of which were strenuously active, to society, especially in her 10 years as visitatrix. It is a ticklish question, for the preceding chapter has shown, only partially, how extremely active she was in all the various apostolates, some that she herself initiated, and those she renewed in spirit and effectiveness. One sister, at the close of Sister's term as visitatrix, said, "Well, I guess this doesn't sound like much depth of thought, but I am going to say it anyhow." I think the greatest gift Sister Catherine gave to our province was in changing the hour of rising from 4 o'clock to 5 a.m. Now go ahead and say I am selfish, but before you do, listen to what that one act did for me. First, I got 8 hours of sleep, so I was alert for my morning meditation, which began at 5:30. And that is true throughout the province. For practically all of us, meditation was a constant struggle against sleep. You hardly ever see a head nodding in drowsiness now. Secondly, I do much better in the classroom. I don't arrive there sluggish with lack of sleep. I could go on and on. Sister Catherine was steadfastly interested in promoting a fervent prayer life in the community, and it was stepped up at the change in the hour of rising. It was noticeable throughout the province how much stronger and steadier the sisters tried to help one another, encouraged by Sister Catherine, to take advantage of all the graces and help to be derived from prayer, and most especially mental prayer. But few people knew of the active opposition Sister met so courageously in making this gigantic departure from the 300-year traditional hour of 4 o'clock rising. But she tossed off any sympathy offered with, "Everything has its price." Then there will be those who will say her greatest contribution to the church and religious life was when, as vice chairman to a much older but very active Mother General Chairman, she helped form the very first National Congress of Major Superiors of Women's Institutes. It acquainted her with practically every religious congregation in the United States and Canada. And when she went as delegate to the first Congress of Religious Superiors, she made so favorable an impression that she was the one named to those cardinals and bishops and mothers general who were asking for details of sister formation as it progressed with Americans. She used to laugh about it in retrospect, saying, "I felt like sitting up a little cashier cage office on a street corner with a sign over it, 'How the Americans do it.'" For Rome especially was visibly interested in our Catholic school system, which gave me a wonderful opportunity to talk on my favorite subject, the sisters. But those who know Sister Catherine best insist that the greatest gift she was given and exercised so well as the years went on was a deep and abiding faith in the church that Christ left us as his great legacy. Over and over she would remind the sisters, Remember, dear sisters, St. Vincent constantly urged us to be true daughters of the Church. When the Pope speaks, he speaks as our Lord inspires him to speak. And if we keep close to the Church, we shall be close to Christ, who promised to be with it always. If we do this in all crises that threaten our faith, what have we to fear? Perhaps Sister Catherine's single greatest achievement was the founding of the first liberal arts college for sisters only, Marillac College. Those who don't or won't get the point of a college for sisters only do not perceive the wisdom in Sister Catherine's philosophy. Sisters are different. It is ridiculous to educate them in the same way and by the same secular standards as lay people in lay colleges, and then expect them to live as Christ called them to live, as he lived, which is the whole point of their holy vocation. Still another school of thought will say that Sister Catherine's greatest contribution to the religious life in particular, and perhaps to lay people as well, is the constant encouragement she brought to sisters of all communities all over the country when both Catholic and secular journalists began giving the sisters a bad time with articles and books asking, should religious life survive? And has the religious life served its purpose? Is it relevant today? All of which was calculated to deter girls from entering the convent and tempting those who were in the convent to leave. Sister Catherine thought this bad time was good for all of us. She predicted that it would separate the chaff from the wheat, but she deplored the harm it would so mendaciously bring about in confusing the reading public, Catholics as well as non-Catholics.